Hello, and welcome to Keep the Channel Open, a podcast featuring conversations about art, literature, and creativity. My name is Mike Sakasagawa, and this is episode 118. Today's guest is Alyssa Harad. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. Today, I'm excited to welcome writer Alyssa Harad to the show for our next KTCO Book Club conversation. Alyssa Harad is the author of a memoir, Coming to My Senses, and has published essays in Jewish Quarterly, Oh, the Oprah Magazine, The Chronicle of Higher Education, and other venues. She is writing a novel inspired by the lives and art of women associated with surrealism, featuring a singing hyena. She lives in Austin, Texas. Now, the book Alyssa chose for our conversation is Tove Jansson's 1982 novel, The True Deceiver. Tove Jansson was born in 1914 in Helsinki into the Swedish-speaking minority in Finland. Best known as the artist and author of the popular Moominland series of children's books, Jansson was also an accomplished painter and wrote 11 books of fiction for adults. She died in 2011. The True Deceiver was first published in Swedish in 1982, but wasn't translated into English until 2009. The book is set in a small Nordic village in the middle of a deep winter, and it follows this sort of struggle between two women. One is Katri Kling, who is a young, very sharp, very smart woman who is something of an outsider, who takes care of her teenage brother and is known for her huge dog that doesn't have a name, for being good with numbers, and for being extremely direct and honest in her speech to the point of bluntness or even rudeness, depending on how you look at it. And the other is Anna Emmeline, who is older. She's a children's illustrator and painter. She's very wealthy and sort of quote-unquote nice. As the title suggests, the book is in many ways about deception, not just of other people, but also of oneself. And for being a fairly short book, it's only about 180 pages long, and one that not a lot exactly happens in. It's a riveting read, and one that really gave me a lot to chew on. And it's one I didn't know before this, so I'm grateful to Alyssa for introducing me to it. Before we get started, there is a link in the show notes to where you can purchase a copy of The True Deceiver. We are going to be discussing the whole book, including spoilers, so if it's important to you to go in completely cold, then go ahead and pause the episode, pick up a copy of the book, and come back and listen afterwards. I've also put a link to Alyssa's memoir, Coming to My Senses, so check that out as well. As always, I do recommend ordering from your local independent bookstore if you can. Finally, I'd love to hear your thoughts on The True Deceiver and on my conversation with Alyssa, so please do join in by using the hashtag KTCO Book Club on Twitter. All right, let's get started. Here's my conversation with Alyssa Harad about Tove Jansson's novel, The True Deceiver. So thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to me about this book and for picking this book. I really enjoyed it. I found it really interesting. Tove Jansson isn't somebody whose work I was super familiar with beforehand. So having this opportunity was really a treat for me. The first thing that I wanted to sort of talk about, if it's okay, is what was it about this book that made you want to choose it for our conversation?
Well, I think it's exactly what you just said, that most people are familiar with the Moomins, Jansson's cartoon characters, these sort of round, hippo-like bohemians who live in a northern place and have adventures. And I was not familiar with her fiction until I started reading Allie Smith, who is a big Jansson fan, and she wrote the intro, in fact, to my copy of The True Deceiver. And I can't get over the fact that this woman wrote 11 books for adults, and she's almost totally unknown as a fiction writer. Imagine writing 11 books and being only known for the cartoon characters that you drew earlier in your life. I mean, she is a legend for the Moomins. But, yeah. And this book in particular, I find to be so sharp and strange and particular to her and her concerns. I think her most popular fiction that's been translated is probably The Summer Book, which is an extremely different book. This is very much a winter book, True Deceiver. Summer Book is a very gentle, kind of melancholy, warm, almost elegiac book about the relationship between a grandmother and her grandchild in a summer where it's pretty clear the grandmother will die by the end of the book. But in spite of that, it's not a bleak book. It's this celebration of summertime and love and tenderness. So it's interesting to go from that to this book, which is the opposite in almost every way. It's about a battle. It's about wintertime. It's about some kind of weird game that's being played. And instead of being about love, although that's definitely present in the book, especially between the main character, Ketri, and her brother, Mutz. I'm learning to pronounce his name now because I've been pronouncing it wrong, apparently, for years.
Well, just so you know, I one of my good friends here in San Diego is Swedish, and he and his wife happen to be named Mats and Anna, and I've been saying their name wrong for like 5 or 6 years now. So
Right. I was so grateful for the little recording that you made with him, because I've also been pronouncing Tova's name wrong. Like a good American. But yes, so Ketri has this overwhelming love for her brother Mats. But the book is really about this weird game that takes place between Ketri and Anna, and about the opposition between their two natures. And they are both people, recognizable as human, and I think sort of mythological and fable-like. And the book really lives in that place in between folklore, myth, and some kind of realism. And I love that dance that it makes. And I just think it's this very strange little gem of a book that I wish everybody would read. And that's why I gave it to you. Yeah.
Well, it was really an interesting book to read. And one of the things about it is precisely that sort of feeling that you just mentioned, that sort of feeling of being sort of in between a fable and contemporary realism. It's funny, in talking about this with my Swedish friends, who I just mentioned, they kept asking me because they haven't read this book either. They obviously are very familiar with the Moomin stories, having grown up with those, but neither of them had read any of her adult fiction either, which I also thought was kind of interesting. And they kept asking me, where is the book set? And I kept saying, it's really unclear where the book is set.
It's set in the north.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's set in a small village in the Scandinavian north.
Yeah.
That's what I think. It could be Sweden or Finland or some slightly mythic place hovering in between there and Iceland. It's definitely far away from a major city, although they do seem to have access to one. But it has that same quality that villages, I'm thinking about Flannery O'Connor and Eudora Welty, and even is it the Spoon River anthology? Oh no, Winesburg, Ohio. That's what it's called. That there are often in fiction these villages, right? That are sort of their own character and also a mythic signifier. The village, the shtetl, this place that is a place where everybody forms a kind of organic unit, and there aren't enough of them for there to be strangers.
Yeah.
So even though Ketri is an outsider, and she's marked as an outsider in many, many ways, she's still a part of the village and a really important part. And that makes everybody in the village a little angry with her, sometimes a lot angry.
Yeah.
They feel beholden to her and also want to cast her out, but can't quite bring themselves to do it. And she feels the same way, I think. She's definitely on the outside and yet in the center of things at the same time. And that strikes me as something that's only possible in a very small town.
Yeah, that outsiderness is something that's really interesting. And it's right from the beginning, it's something that's very foregrounded.
Yes.
So why don't we sort of start with sort of getting into what, how the book kind of goes, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Right at the beginning, we're introduced to this character of Ketri. And the first chapter is setting up this exact relationship that you've been talking about how she's kind of an outsider. And, one of the things that comes up several times in the book too, is how, she's got a different color eyes than everyone else in the book.
And hair.
Yeah. And something else that I thought was very interesting that my Swedish friend mentioned to me when I was asking him, how do you pronounce all these names? He pointed out that the name Ketri is something that he would think of as a stereotypically Finnish name.
Ah.
All the other names in the book are more Swedish sounding.
Interesting.
And so that's definitely something I would have missed had I not had that context, which also, considering Tove Jansson's personal history of, growing up in a Swedish-speaking community in Finland, seems sort of relevant, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's this first chapter sets up her relationship with her brother, who she sort of takes care of. The very first thing that she is said about her is that she's screening the lamp so that she won't wake her brother up while she's making coffee. And then she puts a little thermos by his bed. So this is like the first thing we learn about her, is that she really cares deeply for her brother. And this motivates everything that comes later in the book, sort of. But,
yeah, we can get back into that later. Her motivations. I have a little passage I want to share.
Yeah. But the thing that is the most striking about this, and the copy that I have also has that introduction by Ali Smith, and Smith mentions it too. Of course, it's, how could you not? In her introduction, she writes about this too, about how halfway through the chapter, which is very short, it's only about 5 pages long, you get this shift in perspective that's very abrupt, moving from the third person to the first person. And that happens throughout the book, but it's like, it's very jarring every time it happens, or at least it was for me. And so, but since it happens so early in the book, I mean, you can't help but notice it. What did you think about that?
I think it's very alarming. It's a moment when we shift away from that omniscient narrator who kind of hovers over everything and can enter different people's minds, that offers us a kind of God view and a kind of safety, to suddenly being inside Ketri's head, which feels like a dangerous place to be. And I think it's meant to be disruptive. It was interesting to reread Ali Smith's introduction and remember that Jansson had such a hard time writing this book, that she really went through draft after draft, that it was a kind of hard labor for her. So that you have to believe whatever is left in this text was a very deliberate choice. It wasn't something that just arose out of a kind of spontaneity and she decided to leave it in. So those weird breaks, I think, are meant to decenter us as readers and bring Ketri forward. And they do that. And then I was thinking about this a lot, the degree to which we're invited to root for Ketri versus Anna, and how we really are set up to think that Ketri is our hero, even though she's sort of an anti-hero and a dangerous person. But I'm not sure how that plays out in the end. I think the book remains entirely ambivalent about who wins this game and who we should have been rooting for from the beginning. But I do think we're pushed in that direction, partly by that little intrusion of the first person in the beginning. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting because of those first person segments that happen throughout the book, you get the most visibility into Ketri's internal processes and what it is that she's thinking about. You do get glimpses of this here and there with other people. There are other moments where like a sentence or two will be in first person and not set off with quotes, but it's very clear that it's just the omniscient narrator saying this is what the person is thinking right now. And that's interesting. But the thing about, I was talking about something similar with Matthew Salis's a little while ago about his book and about the use of first person and how when you read a book in first person, it really privileges that point of view and it's very seductive and it really gives you, it puts you on the side of the person who is the narrator so that when the narrator is doing something questionable or maybe lying to themselves or lying to you, the reader, it's kind of almost like implicates you, the reader, in the things that they're doing. I find it a fascinating device, but it's also one that because it's such a seductive viewpoint, it can be easy to miss if you're not reading for the nuance. You know what I mean?
I think that's really true, but I think Jansson has taken care of that for us by being so disruptive in her shift. So she is going to align us with Ketri. She's going to be seductive in that way. I think partly because we might be suspicious of Ketri as an outsider, since she's also introduced that way to us, and as someone who is hard to sympathize with and who rejects sympathy. But at the same time, she makes it so obvious when she's making that shift. It really is alarming and disruptive. So we can't help but be aware that we're being introduced into somebody else's head for a moment. It's like that Brechtian method of showing all the strings, right? Showing the puppet strings, showing the machinery as a way of creating awareness in the reader that's very different from attempting to bring them under a spell.
Yeah.
But it wavers back and forth, right? In fact, I'm just thinking about this now. Ketri throughout the book has these very strong ideas about what's fair and what's not. She's playing this manipulative game, but she has these internal rules for herself about what she can do and what she can't. And I wonder if those dramatic shifts are in some way Jansson's way of saying, yes, I'm going to weave this fictive spell. Yes, I'm going to seduce you into this particular viewpoint, but I'm going to give you this chance right away up front to let you know that that's what I'm doing. And this is how it's going to go. And here is where your sympathies are being directed. So now that I've done that, I can do anything I want because I warned you. Right?
Yeah.
It's a very interesting decision. I think it's very strange.
It is. Yeah. It is really weird. I hadn't thought of that sort of Brechtian comparison before. That's an interesting one because I think you're right on about that it is sort of showing the artifice of language and of like the tools of fiction in a way that makes the reader aware of them. But even with that, I mean, I don't know about you, but I still found those sections, and they happen more and more often, and they'll be shorter in different parts, right? That you slip in and out of it a little more quickly. That it's such a powerful seduction that even with the sort of rigging being exposed, it's still working on me. It's still operating very strongly on me. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. And even though Ketri makes her motivations and her manipulations clear to everybody, people still willingly walk forward into them. sometimes they get mad about having done so, or they try to call her out, but none of that seems to have any effect. It just keeps rolling forward. There's a certain degree to which, throughout the book, people call her a witch and people call her a wolf. She's described as a wolf and a witch over and over and over again. And I think there's something in all of us that longs for an encounter with someone like that. We long for an encounter with that wildness and that magic. So even if we get the warning, we might still, go into the forest with our baskets and meet the wolf on the way, or go and visit the witch in her hut. It's a really lovely way to play with that problem, I think.
So moving, we're still in the first chapter.
Should we just set up the arc?
Yeah, sure.
For people?
Yeah.
So this book is mostly about, because I've said over and over again, it's a kind of game. So it's mostly about this encounter between Ketri and Anna. We've described Ketri pretty well. Anna is a children's book illustrator. She doesn't actually write the text herself. We're told over and over again, the publisher supplies it for her. And what she's famous for are these elaborate drawings of the forest floor and these kind of tacky, sentimental rabbits covered in flowers. And Anna gets described over and over again as a rabbit. She has rabbity front teeth. She's kind of vague and fluffy and sentimental. She lives by herself in one of the biggest houses in town. She clearly has more money than other people do in the town. And when the story opens, Ketri is living with her brother Mutz above the local shop. And she has quit her job working for the shop owner because the shop owner is a lustful creep, basically. So Me Too problem. And she keeps avoiding him and turning him down. Although we don't see any of this, it's just referred to in the past, and we get some scenes of the shopkeeper kind of lurking in the doorway, and we're made to understand that his dislike of Ketri and his unfair treatment of her is based on this past rejection. So Ketri has this problem, which is that, she's living above the shop of her harasser. And she comes up with a plan. And we're not quite sure what the plan is, but eventually it emerges that she's going to move herself and Mutz into Anna's great big house. Anna and Ketri are both orphans. I think that's important to the story. Although Ketri might have a father who's alive somewhere. We don't know. She doesn't know either, but her mother did die when she was 16, and she's been raising Mutz ever since. But most of the story is about whether or not Ketri is going to move into the house, and then after she and Mutz do succeed in moving into the house, it's about the changes that incur in all three of the characters, really, because Mutz and Anna have their own separate relationship, which becomes important. Oh, and I should say also that Ketri has a dog, and the dog is this silent, enormous wolfhound who she calls an ordinary shepherd, but is obviously not an ordinary shepherd, and follows her every move and is her familiar and her avatar in many ways. And the dog becomes, as Matt's does, a contested object, or a contested territory between Ketri and Anna.
Yeah.
And even though nothing very dramatic happens, there is so much tension in this book that it might as well be the most murdery thriller you've ever read. I do not know how Jansson produces this tension. I've read the book many times now, and I still don't understand how she ratchets this up, but she does. I don't know if you felt the same way when you read the book, but to me, that's one of its most magical qualities, is that this fairly mundane battle of wills takes on this mythological significance and this incredible psychic tension.
Yeah.
Does that seem fair? Is there anything you want to add to that arc?
No, that would be how I would sum it up. Although there are all of these little asides that that feel to me still very important. Sort of, there are not very many characters. The three that you mentioned, Katri, Metz, and Anna, are the main ones. But then there are all of these other characters too. I mean, you mentioned this doorkeeper too, who interestingly is the only character that I can think of in the book who doesn't have a name besides the dog. But there are, for example, there's the housekeeper that Anna keeps, is employing originally. There's the mailman / grocery delivery person / boat builder Liljeberg, who...
Yes, he's very important because he's sympathetic to Katri. Yeah. Yeah,
and then there's a few other people.
Madame Nygard.
Yeah, Madame Nygord. She's interesting. Like, they all have this, like, a really particular function in the story, even though they're not really very central to the plot, I guess.
Yes.
And a lot of it too seems to be about something that you mentioned before, about sort of what small village life is like and how everybody kind of knows everything about everybody else's business, or thinks they do anyway.
Yes.
Yeah, but that would be the thrust of it, I think. This, and you're right, it is very tense. And something that I thought was really kind of funny is, so in the third chapter, which is sort of where you get a little more insight into Katri's brother Mats, that he's always described as being sort of simple, being, like, one person calls him the village idiot at one point. And I'm not actually sure any of this is fair, even though even his own sister sees him this way. He doesn't, I mean, I'm not really sure what the evidence is for him being a stupid person is, because he seems pretty capable. He can build a boat and design a boat, and he can, fix stuff. And he's only 15 years old. He seems pretty handy, but everybody seems to see him as very simple. There's this exchange between him and his sister at the beginning, because she likes to read literature and he reads these sort of goofy adventure novels. And
which is his connection with Anna.
Right.
They bond over their love of adventure stories. Yeah.
This exchange that they have where she really wants him to read more serious books. And he says, well, I read them. I just don't really like them very much because nothing happens and they're just about people with problems.
Yeah. I loved that. Yeah. It's a pretty good summary of most contemporary literature.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, it's kind of a summary of this book as well, but because there isn't a lot that happens in it, but it feels, like you said, it feels legendary, the struggle between these two.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I have many ideas about why the struggle feels so big. And one of them is that I think this is a struggle between different aspects of Jansson. So she has another novel called Fair Play, which is a phrase that comes up again and again in this book. What's fair? Fair play, a game, a fair game, the rules of the game. This comes up over and over again. And I think it came up over and over again for Jansson. She was always split between her desire to live an artistic life, to be away from home, to be independent, and her very real connection to and love for her family. So that's something she went back and forth with a lot. And she made compromises throughout her life. I also think it's easy to see a split between the writer of this book, the True Deceiver, and the creator of the Moomins, who, while they are not sentimental rabbits covered in flowers, are surely closer to that than this novel is, right? So you have this very sharp, uncompromising character and a kind of vague, sentimental character who nevertheless does have some very serious work as an artist that she does and that she's respected for. And that's kind of her saving grace. It's not limited to that biography, but I think it's connected to it. And that may account for some of the intensity. The other thing I was thinking about is that it's on a mythological level, it's kind of a battle between spring and winter. I think Ketri belongs to the world of winter. She sort of shines brighter when things are cold and dark, and she has to push against the wind and the snow. She's unafraid of that wildness. And once she gets into that big house and things get more comfortable, and especially once spring starts to arrive and there's more light, she stops being able to sleep, and she doesn't really know what to do with herself. Her dog gets stolen away from her by Anna, and the way that happens is that Anna gives the dog treats and tries to play with the dog. She turns the dog into a pet instead of this mythical avatar. The dog has been, up until now, this good soldier of Ketri's. And I just found all that fascinating, the overlap between that mythological battle and the aspects that seem to belong to Jansson's long-term struggle to figure out what's most important in her life and how to have some of each of it, I think.
So that struggle between winter and spring that you mentioned is an interesting one because, so as you mentioned, the Ketri is very associated strongly with winter. She's got this, she's often seems to be most at home when she's trudging through the snow. And she, just by her disposition, is often described as being very cold. Whereas Anna is she's strongly associated with spring. The drawings that she does, she can't work at all unless she can see the ground, and which, because it snows so much, she can't do during the winter. You do get a sort of trading places because at the beginning of the book, it is snowing. It's very snowing. In fact, it's sort of the snowiest winter that anyone can ever remember. By the end of the book, it's spring and Anna is working again. And the two of them are sort of trading places in their level of comfort and direction and sort of purposefulness. Mm-hmm. I think it's kind of interesting because I think most people would characterize spring as, like, if there's going to be a good guy and a bad guy between winter and spring,
yeah,
most people would see spring as the good guy, right? And this book is very much sort of troubling that association, which I thought was really interesting. But at the same time, so these two characters, Ketri is described from the very beginning as sort of alarmingly honest, and to the point where she just completely refuses to engage with any kind of social niceties. She just always says exactly what she thinks, not what people would expect somebody to say. She always is blunt and honest to the point of she doesn't really care if it hurts people's feelings, or at least that's how she presents herself. Whereas Anna is more, like the word you were using was fluffier. And she's kind of scattered. She sort of doesn't.
She's vague.
Yeah, she's vague. She's sort of disorganized, and she's very much more sort of concerned with how she's coming across.
Yes. I think she's also a character who's very much about self-deception.
Mm-hmm.
and a kind of defensive self-deception. So a willed and chosen self-deception. There are certain things that she has turned away from or chosen not to engage with for a very long time. That's actually one of the sources of the tension in the book as well, is that we watch those self unravel. And we have to wonder if Anna is going to survive the loss of that self-deception. How many layers can she go down before? Will she just fall apart? Is there a gaping hole underneath all the vague fluffiness? Or is there a core that we'll get to? And that's a mystery for a long time.
Yeah. And I think so much of the book, especially in the sort of the beginnings of their interactions, really through the middle, really most of the book, it seems to be very much sort of undermining this idea of politeness, of sort of showing the ways that being nice, not kind exactly, but being nice is not just frivolous, but like dishonest towards others and towards oneself, just in the way that you were saying. Through most of the book, I kind of come away with this feeling that this is the theme of the book is the ways that social forms are a form of dishonesty. But I feel like by the end of the book, that itself winds up being troubled and complicated.
Yes, very much so. And I wanted to read this little, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I just wanted to read this little passage on page 50 of I think we have the same NYRB edition, because I think for me, it's a passage that makes me shiver. And I think it's an encapsulation of both the book's emphasis on social niceties as a kind of fakeness, or the word just fell out of my head. I'll remember in a second. But everything that you talked about, but also the danger of what Khetri believes in and wants to do if it's carried to an extreme. Because after all, this is a small village in a very northern place, and people have to keep talking to each other if they're going to survive, right? Everyone can't live like Khetri if they're going to continue living together in the village. So this is just after Anna has told Khetri for the first time that she finds Ketri's lack of politeness to be, she says, "Now don't take this the wrong way, Miss Kling, but I find your way of never saying what a person expects you to say, I find it somehow appealing. And in you, there's no, if you'll pardon my saying so, no trace of what people call politeness. And politeness can sometimes be almost a kind of deceit, can it not? Do you know what I mean?" "Yes," said Khetri, "I do." Khetri walked on out towards the point with the dog. The snow had a crust hard enough to walk on. Spring was coming, a spring that belonged to Khetri Kling. Khetri Kling, who in open and honorable play had finally won a round, who had everything she wanted to achieve within reach. A new strength coursed through her. She ran straight out on the snowdrifts at the beach, broke through the crust, stopped up to her knees in snow, raised her arms and laughed. The dog, back on the lighthouse road, growled, a low warning growl deep in his throat. "Quiet," said Khetri. "Heel." She was giving orders to herself. Now it was only a question of self-control and concentration. The game could continue, and now she would fight with her own weapons, which, she believed, were pure. So that last sentence just sends shivers down my back. And I think up until that point, in the book. And then, we'll circle back through these basic ideas again and again in different ways. The politeness is deceitful. Oh, hypocritical. That's the word I was thinking of. There's a hypocrisy and a sentimentality that Khetri stands against. And I think these issues were very serious for Jansson. She had lived through fascism, right? So the idea that people would cover over something evil with something pretty and a sweet face is not just a problem of interpersonal relations. It's also a political problem and a problem of great seriousness. But I think that last sentence where she says, which she believed were pure, that any kind of purity also starts to become its own fascism. And to believe that you yourself are pure and that your motives are pure, that seems very dangerous to me. Oh, God. There's just something about that passage that I cannot get it out of my head. I just hear it ring through the rest of the book, that belief in her own purity.
Yeah. I've only read the book twice now, but the second time through, that was one that I ended up sort of underlining as well. Because I feel like, the first time I read through this book, I feel like Khetri's her demeanor, and particularly what she says to other people, seems so direct, and it seems so confident and sort of righteous. Like she has this sort of fire to her, which is sort of in contrast with the coldness that she's always described in. But she has this sort of righteous fire to her in like, I'm going to be the one who speaks the truth kind of thing. So the second time I read through it, and in large part because of this line, I was sort of realizing that I don't think that she is actually as confident as she thinks of herself. And in a lot of ways, the image that she's built up for herself is, I'm not sure I would say it's as false or hypocritical as the one that Anna builds for herself, of being this, like, she thinks of herself as just being a nice person that people like, and she's doing a good thing and that kind of thing, without really realizing or thinking about the ways that she's also deceptive and kind of manipulative and self-serving and dishonest. Like, I'm not sure that I can fully equate the two, but on the other hand, I'm not sure I can't. And a lot of the ways that she thinks about herself, Khetri, not just in the ways that she, over and over again, we hear she's honest to a fault kind of thing. And yet she's engaged in the whole sort of plot of the book is engaging in this manipulation and deception of Anna in order to get into her house and insinuate her way into her life and finances. But even aside from that, a lot of the things I was realizing on second reading that she says about fairness, about the way people are like, about what she is like, they almost kind of feel like she's kind of trying to talk herself into seeing this way, or like that she's feeling defensive in a way that nobody's actually accusing her about, which I thought was such an interesting dynamic in the book.
Yes. I think the book asks us to believe in her clarity and then starts to question the value or the completeness of that clarity. So Khetri, one thing we haven't said is that Khetri is associated with numbers in the book. She becomes this person who the villagers visit whenever they have a problem with money or numbers or legal problems. So she's a kind of grave judge, and she believes in contracts. She believes in arithmetic. She wants to believe in a world where there are bright, clear edges, the way the world looks in wintertime, right? But I'm not sure that's actually how the world works. You can have a very clear vision of someone and still have that vision be incomplete. And I think that's partly what we start to see as the book moves forward and Anna and Katri start to blend a little bit. They start to adopt different aspects of each other. Anna starts to find some freedom in, and even some of the cruelty that Katri has. She casts off some of the myths that she's created for herself. She does some things that are cold, even though she's associated with warmth and softness. And Katri has some moments of tremendous regret. There's a moment where, towards the end of the book, spoiler alert, I guess, where she goes to Anna and she tries to take back everything she said to Anna about how people in the village are treating Anna and disrespecting her and cheating her. She says, I was wrong. I didn't tell you the truth. It's all wrong. And Anna basically says, but there's no going back, is there? So we start to learn a little bit about the dangers of that clarity if it doesn't also come along with some compassion.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what makes that purity, the belief in your own purity of intention and thought, so scary. It's a kind of fundamentalism. If you believe you are a pure instrument, then you can do almost anything to other people without feeling any sense of remorse or guilt. The fact that Katri starts to develop those feelings is probably a good sign in the long run for Katri, but in the short term, it's a kind of failure. It's in the game that's being played between her and Anna. It's a loss of power for Katri to have to live in a more complicated world.
I feel like there's so many points of the book where Katri presents herself as being kind of so in control of herself and everything she does. And there are 2 points at which she recants on these things, because earlier in the book, sort of near the midpoint, she's just had a conversation with Liljeberg, who is... Right,
exactly. That's the first time.
Right.
Yep.
So he's the guy, he uses the storekeeper's truck to go, or van, to go into town to get the mail and to get the storekeeper's supplies and these other things. And he's also the boat builder who is... Mutz is really into boats, and he, much of the story is not just about the getting them into the house, but also about allowing Mutz to be able to build and own the boat that he's designed. And so this relationship between Katri and Liljeberg also sort of plays into this as well. She has just finished advising him that the storekeeper has been ripping him off. And this is sort of what she does throughout the whole book, is she just goes around to people and says, you're being taken advantage of. Like, this
Yes.
person is cheating you. At one point, she even says to, I don't remember who she says it to, but she says to someone else that Liljeberg is cheating them. She says that to Anna about a time that he fixed her drain or something like that.
Yes.
And then, but at this point, she goes home and she sits for a second and she gets all worked up, and then she realizes she has to go back right now. She goes back so fast that even though it's dark, she's forgotten her flashlight, and says, look, I have to tell you that all that stuff I just told you was wrong. You're not being cheated. In fact, you're probably coming out on top. And then immediately after that, she says, oh, why did I do that? And
yes,
that was the same question that I had reading that one.
But I think it's a lovely moment when her desire to remain connected to someone and her respect, because the character whose name I can never say, the shipbuilder and delivery guy who you're talking about, he is always on Katri's side. He defends her. He respects her intelligence. He is joyful when he helps to move her and Mats into Anna's house. So he's really one of the few people in the village who's been consistently kind to her and who seems to understand what she is and not be afraid of it. I think what happens is her desire to remain connected to him makes her behave in a way that tries to mitigate the harm of what she's just told him. But it doesn't fit with her self-conception or her conception of the world. Why on earth would she do that? It's a mystery. But it's so lovely, it's a lovely illustration of sometimes those moments we have where our behavior moves out ahead of our self-conception of who we are or even what the world is, right?
Yeah.
And we find ourselves bewildered by our own actions. And like you said, it's also a precursor of what's going to happen between her and Anna in a much more dramatic way later in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that moment.
It's such an interesting thing because she has such an unsparing view of other people. This thing that she does where she's basically kind of being everybody's accountant in the village, sort of begrudgingly, yes. not even begrudgingly on her part, but they're like sort of begrudging of needing her help, even though yes. They all go to her and then get her help and then resent her for it, which is interesting. But this way that she's not just saying, oh, this person overcharged you. Like she actually says, this person is cheating you. This person is taking advantage of you. And that was another thing that, on the second reading, I kind of, the numbers are going to be whatever they are. And so we're set up to trust Ketri's interpretation of the numbers. But another thing that comes out later that I didn't catch at the same time because it doesn't happen at the same part of the book. So earlier, she has told Anna that Liljeberg has overcharged her and he was taking advantage of her. And she says, well, how did you know that? And she says, well, I asked around what the going rate was and then asked how much he charged and it was more. And so he's taking advantage of you. And then confronts him about this and he actually gives her the change, which that part I didn't register with me the first time I read it. But later on, she's talking about... There's a part that I pulled out here. It's in chapter 11 where she and Mats have just moved into Anna's house, which they all call the rabbit house. And they're having dinner and they're having a conversation about how people are, kind of. And at one point she tells her, she says, Miss Emmeline, the things people do for one another mean very little seen purely as acts. What matters is their motives, where they're headed, what they want. And in the moment that it's sort of working on a couple of levels because they're talking about sort of the things that people are sort of asking of Anna. And then I also read it as like sort of she's trying to sort of justify the ways that she's manipulating Anna because she's, in fact, in order to get into the house, she has just broken into Anna's house and stolen a bunch of silver and then she dumps it in a snowbank, right? And never owns up to this. And in fact, somebody else ends up getting caught. And even though that person, this all starts because somebody else has broken into somebody else's house. And then she gets the idea. She breaks into Anna's house, steals a bunch of stuff, then dumps it on next to the path. And then later it's reported that the burglar was caught. I mean, this is a little bit of an aside anyway. Getting back to what I was saying, it's just I read this thing that she's just said as sort of also being defensive on her own behalf. Like, it doesn't really matter what I've done. What matters is that my motives for doing it are pure. But then when I go back and I apply this same reasoning to the ways that she's very critical of everybody else, and in some of the cases, it seems very justified. Like, she talks a lot about how the storekeeper is like, he's overcharging you, like just a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, a little bit there, but he's doing it on purpose and it's systematic. So there's that. The storekeeper is taking advantage of her. And this does seem to add up. And also, given how the storekeeper is very, he's got the Me Too thing. He's also spiteful and kind of petty, and he's always gossiping. And also he's just got this weird thing where he seems to delight in tormenting Anna by sending her organ meats that he knows gross her out.
Yes, that's so weird.
Yeah.
Yes.
But then so in some of these cases, her thing, like he's cheating you, he's taking advantage of you, he doesn't respect you, it seems very apt, right? But then on the other hand, the way that she does this with Lilyberry, she also says he took advantage of you. But then throughout the whole rest of the book, he's just like kind of a nice guy. And then it also occurred to me, well, she confronted him and he actually gave her the change. So it's a little unclear if that, you know, he did charge her more than what the going rate was, but it's not even clear that he even knew that he was doing that necessarily. And once he was confronted about it, he tried to make amends. And so this idea of like people's motives being more important than what they actually did doesn't always, like she doesn't actually know what people's motives are a lot of the time, it seems like.
I think that's actually crucial. And I think that this book often gives us very important information in a very glancing way. We know that Anna is wealthier than almost everybody in the village. She's so wealthy, in fact, that she's been losing all kinds of money over the years with her business deals because she refuses to engage in organizing her contracts, which is, of course, something that Ketri takes care of for her in exchange for skimming off, in clear view, lots of money for Mats and his boat. That's one of the ultimate goals of the game that she's playing. But because if we remember that Anna is rich, then the fact that people are charging her just a little bit more every now and then, the motivations for that are maybe something besides disrespecting her. It is, of course, a form of disrespect to think that you can get away with doing something like that with anybody. So in that sense, Ketri's not wrong. But also, Anna can afford it, and Anna doesn't really care. So why not balance things out a little bit? Maybe Lilyberg was charging her more so that he could charge somebody else less. That seems quite likely with his character, right? But we don't know. We only know this point of conflict that happens because Ketri is using the overcharge to establish a particular relationship with Anna. So she's using it as a tool. It's instrumental and transactional, which is really a kind of betrayal of her friend. If she has friends. Yeah. I don't know if she considers herself to have friends. It's sort of hard to think of a witch and a wolf as having friends.
Yeah.
So maybe she doesn't really consider herself to be in that category, and she thinks it's okay to treat him that way.
Yeah.
Or maybe she thinks he'll respect her more.
Maybe. I
don't know. I don't think that the characters really welcome this kind of psychologizing, like as a form of analysis. Like we can definitely talk about it and have fun with it, but in some ways they're more like the characters in a myth or a fairy tale, where they exist as examples, and then we can talk about how that resonates in our own lives. But their actual psychology is, I think, a little opaque, in spite of the fact that they're always talking about how people should be and whether or not motivations matter. It's interesting.
That is interesting. It sort of actually brings me to another character that I wanted to talk about, who, we get a lot of insight into Ketri and what she's thinking and feeling, and a little bit into what Anna is thinking and feeling. Most of the rest of them, we don't really see what they're thinking and feeling. There's this other character who we mentioned previously, Madame Nygord, who...
Oh, good. I'm glad we're going to talk about her. She's super interesting.
She's really interesting, and more interesting to me, too, just because, I almost didn't notice her the first time I read through the book, because she's so sort of level, and she just seems kind of reasonable in a way that most of the other people in the book aren't. But one thing that I also noticed in the second reading is there are sort of several points where she's kind of contrasted with, but also very compared to Ketri,
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's one point where it's even made explicit where, Anna and Katri are having a conversation, and they're talking about, again, they just keep talking about this throughout the book, is how people do put on a mask and they play a part, and whether that's good or bad is, Katri has one opinion, Anna has another opinion. But Anna is saying to Katri, she's saying, everybody does this. All people play a part. Well, not Madame Nygord, but that's another matter. And I thought, it's like this little throwaway line, that you'd miss it if it wasn't there. But then I thought about it, and she really does, as far as I can tell throughout the book, she's actually playing a very similar role to what Katri does, where, as far as I can tell, she always appears to be very honest and very sort of insightful into what other people are doing. She gives people advice, which is another thing that Katri does. She's the one who actually ends up suggesting you should move in there. Like, you had a break in, Katri is available. You should have her in there. And at every point, she's doing a lot that's very similar, but people actually seem to really like her too. Like, she's not off-putting in this way. She seems very sort of bland and just kind of kind of warm. People like her, but she sort of fades into the background a little bit. And I just thought that contrast between the two of them is so interesting. And I completely missed it on the first reading.
Yeah. So I have theories about Madame Nygard. She's actually quite alive in my imagination, even though she has 5 lines in the whole book. She was who I was thinking about when I said that sometimes the book gives us very important information in a very glancing way. And I was thinking specifically of the phone call that Madame has with Anna early in the book, where they talk about Anna's parents, and there's a silence, and then Madame says, very mysteriously, I think, that Anna's father, she remembers how Anna's father used to walk through the village stroking his beard. She gives us this image of Anna's father as this sort of generous patriarch, this glorious patriarch. And you can tell it's clear that Madame has thought carefully about what to say to Anna, that this is not a random observation, that she's trying to provoke something in Anna. But it's very mysterious to the reader what that thing is or how it's connected to their other conversation. But in fact, it has the desired effect, and it catalyzes Anna. And Madame, she does that to Anna several times in the book. Almost every conversation they have results in some kind of action on Anna's part. And I think that's partly what makes her seem connected to Katri, is that she's there to poke at Anna and cause things to happen. But she's also a kind of guardian spirit for Anna. She keeps calling to say, are you doing okay? How are things going up there in the rabbit house? And she seems, so in some ways, she seems to be a future possibility for Katri. Maybe this is what happens if Katri finds the ability to balance her clarity with compassion. Maybe this is what happens when the fundamentalism of your youth fades into a more humane complexity, is that you get to become Madame Nygard and make an occasional phone call that turns people's lives upside down. But still everybody likes you. You get the feeling that she is herself a kind of witch or oracle. She's a little distant from the town. I think she lives in a larger place. Is that right?
That was something my Swedish friend was mentioning, is that it's interesting that, because I just gave him a list of names and said, how do you pronounce these? And he said, it's interesting because you have the housekeeper's name is Fru Sundblom. Fru means basically madam, but then you have this other woman who's actually called Madame. And so that in this context, this is sort of indicating this character must be much fancier than the other one. And,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought of her as having a kind of sophistication that a lot of the villagers didn't have. She seems to be living in a place with more people and maybe have traveled more. I that's probably totally made up on my part, but she does seem to represent in the book a more complex and a richer life and possibility that dials in every now and then into this ongoing primal battle that's happening. Yeah. She's such an interesting character, even though she hardly gets any lines.
She is. She's really interesting. And, you know, I feel like she is operating in some ways as almost like this midpoint between the other two main characters, where there's a way that Ketri kind of reminds me of myself when I was a teenager, where when I was a teenager, when I was in high school, I sort of prided myself on being brutally honest all the time and not being polite just for the sake of politeness and not like, you know, being dishonest, you know, to save someone else's feelings. And, you know, I kind of had this way of thinking that that was like the right way to be and that was like always justified and that was just, there's sort of a way that also I at the time felt superior to other people in this way. Like that there was like, I was better than other people because I wasn't playing this stupid game. And I feel like I see some of that in Ketri as well, where I feel like Madame Nygord, she's doing a lot of similar things where she is telling truth, but she's doing it in a way that is not disregarding the sort of function that social lubricants have, you know, where especially like to the point that you made earlier about, you know, we live in a very small town. We live in, like, there's just not that many of us and we all kind of have to be here together and not tear each other apart. That she seems to be able to balance this sort of truth-telling, honesty, wisdom kind of thing with also, you know, not being cruel about it. That I thought like how that functions to contrast with Ketri. I like this idea that this is what Ketri could grow into someday. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, that's interesting.
You know who else does that balance is Mutz. So I'm thinking of the moment where Ketri has this talent for mimicry, we're told. And this is important because she is going to soon be signing Anna's papers with Anna's perfect signature and writing in Anna's handwriting and taking on other aspects of her. And when we're being introduced to the idea that she's so good at mimicry, we're told that Ketri used to imitate the villagers to entertain Mutz. But Mutz didn't like it because it made him see the villagers in a very unkind way. And so he sort of refuses Ketri's vision of the villagers, even though he knows it's uncannily accurate. It's missing some aspects that make those people human. It turns them into caricatures. She can't help but reproduce them in the way that she sees them. And he refuses that vision. You mentioned earlier that people keep calling him simple, even though he is a good reader and has this incredible talent to design boats and to fix things. He's clearly not simple in the way of having a learning disability or something like that. I think that he stands for a kind of innocence that Anna pretends to have but doesn't really have. Maybe Mutz is the only pure character in the book. He has the things that he loves. He moves towards them. He doesn't really know, Ketri's pretty sure of this anyway, he doesn't really know how to defend himself from the complications of social relations in the village. And that's part of what makes Ketri so scared for him. I think she wants to protect his innocence And in some ways, she has leased her own innocence out to him. They form a unit, right? And he gets to have all of these humane, warm, innocent characteristics that she does not allow herself to have, so that she can continue to protect him.
I did think that was very interesting. Like very early in the book, she is sort of thinking in one of these first person segments, she's thinking about the thing that she's doing and that she's starting to do, which she views as being on his behalf. And she wants to talk to him about it. She has this impulse like, I can't talk to anybody else. I can only talk to him, and I want to talk to him. And then she says, but I can't. Mats has no secrets. That's why he's so mysterious. No one must disturb him. We have to leave him undisturbed in his clean, simplified world, and there's also a point in the first chapter, I think, where she's talking about how everybody thinks money stinks, but it's actually the people that stink. But except for Mats, like, he has no smell. He's pure.
Yeah.
Like, in terms of how he functions as a sort of archetype in the book, there is that way about him, but also it kind of reminded me that line about the smell reminded me kind of weirdly of The Sound and the Fury. You know, there's that thing about in the first section of The Sound and the Fury, there's the character who is mentally handicapped, and he always like smells other people, like associates them with their smells. There's something about that, but also I think that's part of what made me uncomfortable about this, is that like everybody in the book seems to treat him, including his sister, who is ostensibly the closest one to him, who wants to take care of him, but they treat him like he's not a person. They don't give him any kind of agency to have his own opinions about what kind of books he wants to read, or, give him credit for being as capable as he is. It didn't really sit very well with me, that.
Do you think that's true though? Because I feel like I understand what you're saying, but I think there are some arenas in which he's allowed to have agency and is respected. They're just very circumscribed. So he has his world of adventure books with Anna, and most importantly, he has the shipbuilding yard and wherever that enclosed space is that they're in, where all the other shipbuilders have a lot of respect for him. They understand that he's talented. They know that they can give him work to do, and he will be fastidious and perfectionist and slow, but amazing, right? And it's almost a spiritual connection that the descriptions that we get of how he regards tools and I guess this may be a little over the top, but I did think about the fact that Jesus was a carpenter, right? So we do have a little bit of this connection between a Christ child figure and Mats, and I don't think that's totally out of range. I do think it means that he's fenced in, and part of what happens in the end of the book, when everybody gets mixed up and out of their categories, is that he starts to make some decisions that surprise Ketri and that Ketri doesn't know about. And he also objects to some of Ketri's behavior in a way that shocks her and alienates her and really sends her over the edge. So yeah, I see what you're saying, and those moments when he breaks out of that and claims agency for himself are very they imbalance everything else in the book. Yeah.
To me, it was sort of, it wasn't that the book necessarily is trying to hem him in. It's more like his sister is trying to do that on top of all of the rest of the village. And I felt like this, because it was exactly this, the way that their relationship changes, where she has this expectation that, like, I'm going to keep everything secret from him. I'm going to be doing everything for him. I'm like, sort of skimming this money off, but doing it in plain sight kind of thing to benefit him so that he can have his boat. But she never really talks to him about what she's doing or even asks him if it would be okay with him. The way that their relationship changes toward the end of the book, I feel like is really kind of pointed because it, showing the way that he does have thoughts of his own and he does, have his own opinions and his own values that aren't always in complete alignment with Ketri's, but that she has been sort of ignoring for most of the book.
Yes.
So to me, that felt like an important dynamic in the arc of the book.
Yes, I agree. And it's making me think while you're talking that the age Mats is when all this takes place is just about the same age that Ketri was when their mother died and she became his guardian. So, and it's an age that is a cusp age. It's the age you are in all those coming of age books, right? When you're 15 or 16 and you are in between the world of childhood and the world of adulthood. And maybe you go back and forth between them, and lots of people underestimate you because they're used to seeing you as a child, but maybe now you have some ideas of your own. There is a sense that Mats will never totally enter the world of adulthood in the same way that Anna and Ketri and the villagers have, that he might always be someone who is mostly alone or mostly happy at his workbench or out on a boat on the ocean. But you're right. That doesn't mean that he is not a person or that he doesn't have his own agency and own opinions about things. I did find the secrecy around the giving of the boat to him to be very odd. I almost felt, because the book really turns on that, it's an important plot point that Ketri is keeping that secret. And if she weren't keeping it secret, there would be a bunch of things that couldn't happen. And it almost felt like a cultural slip. Like I was missing some context about why she had to keep that secret. Did you have ideas about that? Well,
I mean, I sort of had the impression that she wanted to avoid some sense of impropriety with the payment because ultimately the money is coming from Anna. But until it actually has come from her, she can't say that it's hers kind of thing. But I'm not sure, like it did seem a little bit not quite completely settled to me as well. And maybe she's protecting Mats's feelings of pride, and she doesn't want him to be to think that the boat is coming and then have it fall through and be disappointed. So I guess that could account for some of that secrecy. Yeah. It's interesting. So this that you're talking about, the thing that happens towards the end of the book is, and we mentioned this already, that there is a way that Anna kind of steals the dog and steals the brother kind of thing. So this whole time Ketri has been working sort of behind the scenes to amass enough money to be able to have this boat that Mats has designed, have it constructed, and then have him be the owner of it. And she's doing that by sort of manipulating her way into Anna's finances so that she can, she justifies it to herself by saying, well, I've saved her this percentage of money. And so of that, I might as well take a little bit of it because she's still ending up with more than what she would have had. And of the part that I'm taking, some of that will be for him. And which, on the one hand kind of seems fair, but the way that she's doing it is so, because it's so below board, just seems a little shady. But also they play that game, the Mats game, where Anna herself sets aside a portion of the profits for Mats. Right. Right? Yeah. So, yeah, it does. It starts out as something that she's doing secretly. And then once she's able to transform it into a form of gin rummy, it becomes something that Anna is participating in. But I guess we never are totally sure that Anna takes it seriously enough
to know that she's giving the money to Mats. Or maybe Anna doesn't really take money seriously at all.
Right.
Money seems to be fictional for Anna. She has plenty of it and she's never had to worry about it. So it remains very abstract for her. Yeah. And they argue over that.
They
right?
do. Yeah.
Ketri gets really angry with her for regarding it that way.
Yeah. But then towards the end of the book, Anna just sort of decides that like she and Mats he's showing her drawings and showing her his drawings, his plans for the boat, his sketches anyway. And this is another way that they connect because they're both artists in their own way. She even says this to him. He says, oh, they're just sketches. The good drawings are down in the boathouse. And she says, you know, you're probably talking right now to one of the only people in the village who even knows the full meaning of the word sketch. And they're able to connect over that. And after she admires his drawings, she says, you know what? I'm going to buy that boat for you. And that totally throws Ketri into a tailspin between this and the fact that the way that Anna has been feeding her dog treats and trying to play with him, you know, like trying to teach him how to be a retriever. This, you know, her dog eventually turns on her and runs off into the forest. And she feels at least that the way that this relationship with her brother now is undermined because it was supposed to be her gift to him, not Anna's. And this is sort of the climactic point of the book, right? Is this sort of blow up that she has of I was trying to do this thing and you ruined everything kind of thing.
Yes. After
which the last 2 chapters are just these very slim. Each one is like 1 page or even part of a page. At the end of the book, they have this big fight saying like, you ruined everything. You stole my dog. You stole my brother. And then she does the thing we were talking about before where she tries to take back like, oh, these people weren't cheating you. And Anna says, you know, you can't take it back. Why don't you write me a letter about this? And
no,
it's the other way around. She
refuses the letter. And she says that Ketri should take a nap.
Right.
Which is like, just forget it. Just go to sleep.
Right.
Enough already. Just lie down.
Right. Ketri says, I'll write it in a letter. And she says, no, you're not going to do that. I'm going to go take a nap. Yeah. And at the end of the book, we have Ketri sort of by herself, like she can't really settle her thoughts. And the only thing she can think about is her dog. And then the final chapter is Anna is going out into the forest. It's finally spring and she starts to draw. And it's, I don't know, the way that this all kind of comes to a head here between the two of them and the way that Ketri at the beginning of the book is so controlled and so like everything is planned out. And at the end, she's sort of very disordered and can't sort of find her place in things anymore. Whereas Anna, who for much of the book has been very scattered and fluffy and, you know, disorganized in the way in all of her dealings, she's finally very centered, very grounded, and she's just moving forward with her life kind of thing. It's and
also she rejects the rabbits.
Yeah.
She's finally out from under. The book really begins with this discussion of how she's really only interested in drawing the forest floor. And she has these grandiose ideas about how she's the only one who really knows how to draw the forest floor. That's her reason for being alive. She's the best person for the job. She's the only one who can do it properly. But she has to draw these rabbits with the flowers on them in order to publish the books, because that's what the children want. And that's how the books get sold, and the rabbits are the characters. But now she's done with the rabbits.
Yeah.
In that final paragraph. The final line of Ketri's final chapter where she says, the only image that ultimately stuck was the dog, a dog running on and on without rest under the ominous ensign of the wolfskin, is so mysterious to me that I had to look up the definition of ensign because I thought that might help me, but it didn't really. It's just it basically means battle flag. It's a symbol that appears on a battle flag, which makes sense because we've just come to the end of a battle. But I'm not really sure even what that image would look like, an ensign of a wolf skin. There does seem to be it's strange that she's been a wolf and that the dog has been wolf-like throughout the whole book. And now we just have the skin and the drawing of the skin. And I am really, in the same way that I'm haunted by that line about the purity of her motives, I'm haunted by this image of the dog running and running. And we just leave him there running. And we leave Ketri there running. There's really we don't get any resolve. She's been blown up and that's it. We just leave her there in the rubble.
Yeah. I want there's something interesting to me, like the way, particularly in the ending, but really in a lot of ways, this book actually felt a lot more like a short story to me than it does like a novel. And I just thought that was really interesting. Like, I feel like so often in a novel, you will get more closure at the end of it. Even novels that tend to have a very, modern novels, a lot of them have sort of an open ending, but there is still a sort of sense of resolution on some level, where here it's, especially with her, there isn't. Where I feel like that's a much more common thing to happen in a short story. And in so many ways, the book, sort of, whether it's the tone or that sort of mythic feeling that we were talking about before, or the sort of spareness of the language, it felt a lot more like a short story to me. And I don't know why that feels significant to me, but it's just something that I keep coming back to when I think about this book.
Yeah. When you say that, what comes to mind to me is the elliptical quality of the book, the way it has the self-enclosed quality of it, so that if it were a shape, it would be an egg. It has this very smooth surface. It's not, I think of novels often as houses. You walk in, there's a lot of rooms. Maybe there's an attic that we're told about, but we never visit. We know a lot about the land that the house was built on. There's all this room in a novel for digressions and history and intergenerational stories. We get some of all of that in this book, but we get it just in these little glancing pieces of information. The real focus of the story is almost, when I was trying to think about the book and make notes on it in preparation for our conversation, I found that I kept getting bounced off the surface of the story, that I would try to think my way into it. And then I would find myself just there in a particular image, or even the image of the cover on this NYRB edition, which is a painting by Jansson, is something that lives in my mind and encapsulates the story more than any particular conversation between the characters or plot line. It's like you get to the end of the story and the whole thing just closes up again. I think that probably has something to do with the difficulty that Jansson had in creating the story, that it ends up being this very dense little object, like a sonnet or a jigsaw puzzle. It's all, everything's been honed and fitted together so tightly that in some ways it has the impenetrable quality of a short story rather than the big, baggy, sprawling quality that some novels can have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Something that occurred to me too is that because of this sort of semi-fable kind of register that the book takes on, and the way that if we just look at Ketri's arc by herself, because the way that the book starts with Ketri and ends with Anna, I feel like that's very important. But if we just look at the arc of Ketri herself from the opening to the penultimate chapter, where she's sort of left in ruin, that it almost has this sort of like Greek tragedy kind of arc to it where, you know, like it starts with this whole, like so much of Greek tragedy involves a character having this fatal flaw and this hubris of challenging the gods kind of thing. And then they're left in ruin at the end of it. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just agreeing. I'm like, oh my God, that's dead on. Yes, exactly. That's exactly what happens. I never thought about it that way, but Ketri has so much hubris.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the Greek tragedies, I mean, these were things, you know, Greek theater was always very inherently and explicitly moralistic and intended to like try to teach the audience a lesson, or at least like affirm this is why our culture is the way it is. Whereas here it doesn't, this is a way that it departs from the Greek tragedy because like I don't feel like that's what we can take away from it. Like the book doesn't, it's not just here as a morality play to like punish this character for her hubris. I feel like it's doing something more complicated than that, even though that it does leave her in that place. It's very hard to get your arms completely around this, which is, I mean, that's exactly what you were just saying, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe because it's not didactic, it's illustrative. So it's a record of how these things work, maybe in society at large, as well as in these characters. Self-deception, the worship of the clean, bright line, purity, the battles, these little battles that are the basis for all the large, big battles that go on. It's a little miniature snapshot of some things that when you move out, if you scale them up, right, become very big themes. But I love that she doesn't do that. She just leaves you in the miniature, and she leaves you in that mythic place and trusts you to be able to make those connections for yourself. And I think that's partly what allows her to avoid being didactic. Yeah, it's super interesting. I think by the end, we're totally unsure of whether or not there was a hero in the book. I am, at least.
Yeah.
I mean, whose side should I be on? I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what makes it so appealing, especially for right now, is that I think just sort of collectively, or I don't know if collectively, but at least like among the people that I hang out with on Twitter, like I think a lot of us are getting really tired of the sort of heroic battle narrative of, you know, of there being sides, of there being, I mean, even as we are also in our actual lives engaged in, you know, a struggle that has clear, well, at least apparently clear lines in many cases. And we're not, it's like, while we are struggling to fight these things in our real life, that like the way that like it's making the art feel unsatisfying, you know, when the art is sort of too simplistic in that way. So I think that's something about this book that feels, it's not comforting, but it is, it feels appropriate to the moment to me.
Yes. And I think that we've seen very clearly the way fundamentalism on both sides of the political spectrum is dangerous, right? Yeah. So believing your motives are pure is a dangerous thing, no matter what your motives are.
Yeah.
You end up on the side of fascism, even if your intentions are completely different. Yeah. And being humane is difficult and complex and involves compromise. And I think those are qualities that are hard to come by when you're locked in the kind of battle that we're in right now, where people are literally fighting for their lives in many cases.
Yeah.
The temptation to draw clear lines and create your life around those lines is strong for obvious reasons. One of which is the people on the wrong side of things often live that way. And it can feel like we need to live that way in order to respond to them. That's totally obvious on Twitter, right? Because that's how you get a response on Twitter it's hard to say something complicated on Twitter.
Yeah.
Actually, it's much easier to say something bold and then have an argument about it. It's hard to be kind in this atmosphere of we're in our long winter, I think, in many ways right now.
Oh my.
We'll see if we get a spring. I don't know.
Yeah.
I had a couple of companion books that I was going to suggest.
Sure.
Is this a good time to do that?
Yeah.
It feels like we've got to the end of this one. So partly I picked this book up originally because I always like to read a book about a very cold place when I'm in the middle of the Texas summer. It's just unbearable, the amount of heat that we get and how long it goes on. So I always find it comforting to read a book set in the North. And this summer I read a memoir written in, I'm opening up the jacket flap, in 1934, this woman named Christiane Ritter, she's Danish, went to go live with her husband in the polar north. I think it was Spitsbergen, so kind of northern Sweden. And they lived in this little hut along with a hunter for a year. And there are many, many mysterious things about this book, like why does her husband live in a hut in the north instead of in Denmark with his wife? And how do these three people get along in the hut? We don't know any of that. But what we get instead is this rapturous, attentive, almost mystical description of the landscape and how it feels to live there. And it is the most amazing book. She never wrote another one. She was a painter, so this is her only book. It's called A Woman in the Polar Night by Christiane Ritter. And I had read it just before I reread The True Deceiver for you. And knowing that landscape better, and knowing what that long winter was like really gave me a lot of context for what was happening in The True Deceiver. Because I think that those long winters are something that most of us have not, or many of us, I guess, have not experienced. Unless we live somewhere far north enough that the sun dips below the horizon and never comes back up for months and months. The other one I wanted to recommend was one of Tove Jansson's Moomin books, Moominland Midwinter, which is ostensibly a children's book, but is really one of the masterpieces of lonely literature. It is the strangest book for a book that is ostensibly for children. It features the main Moomin character, Moomin Troll, and what happens is mostly the Moomins hibernate. They all go to sleep, so they don't actually live through that long winter that Christiane is describing. But this time, Moomin Troll wakes up, and all his family is asleep, and everyone is gone, and the world is completely transformed. And he has this adventure where he has to deal with this brand new world that has completely changed while he went to sleep. So it's kind of the children's version of The True Deceivers. And then I also wanted to recommend Jansson's novel Fair Play, which is a really lovely novel that's kind of based on her relationship with her partner. And it's about these two women who are lovers. We assume they are living in a spousal-like relationship. And they're both creative people, a writer and an artist, and they have to figure out how to make that work. And they make all kinds of fairly radical compromises while still remaining in love. So in many ways, it's a mirror version of The True Deceiver, but I think a more hopeful one. It's a love story. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for talking with me about this book. I really enjoyed the book, and I really enjoyed our conversation. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I've been listening to you for such a long time. It's very strange to have you in my ear, and really, really terrific to be talking. Yeah.
Okay, as I mentioned at the top of the show, there is a link in the show notes to purchase a copy of The True Deceiver, as well as a link to purchase Alyssa's memoir, Coming to My Senses. You can also order either book from your local independent bookstore. That's a great thing to do. And if you've got thoughts you'd like to share about today's conversation or about The True Deceiver, join in on Twitter by using the hashtag KTCO Book Club. I'd love to hear from you. And that is our show. Editing and mixing on this episode is by me. The music is by Poddington Bear, and transcription help on this episode is by Shea Aguinaldo. If you're enjoying these conversations, please help out by helping spread the word. Tell a friend, share the episodes on social media, and don't forget to tag the show in your tweets at ChannelOpenPod. You can find all of the rest of the show's social media information, email newsletter, show notes, and transcripts at keepthechanneleopen.com. Keep the Channel Open will be on a short hiatus while I take time off to prep for election week, and if you're in the U.S. and are able to vote, please make sure to turn in your mail ballot as early as possible, or if you're voting in person, make sure you know where your polling place is, how you'll be getting there, and how to keep safe while you're voting. This is the most consequential election in living memory, so please make sure to do your part in turning our country away from authoritarianism. We'll be back with a new episode on November 18th, so do be sure to come back for that one. And until then, remember, keep the channel open.